Ladies and gentlemen, today we explore a concept that may appear passive at first glance, but holds an extraordinary power: silence. We are often taught that confidence means speaking up, defending ourselves, or setting the record straight. But there is another side of strength, the strength of silence, a silence that is not rooted in weakness, but in wisdom and emotional mastery. In the world of interpersonal communication, silence has long been misunderstood. It is often associated with submission, discomfort, or a lack of preparedness. In reality, silence, when used with intention, is one of the most powerful communicative tools available to a person, especially a person of composure, self-awareness, and high standards. In refined social dynamics, silence is not emptiness, it is presence. It is the refusal to be emotionally hijacked by external triggers. Where the average person may rush to fill gaps in conversation or defend themselves in conflict, the individual who commands silence understands that true power does not chase recognition, it attracts it. Let us consider a scenario common to many. Imagine you are in the company of someone attempting to provoke you, perhaps through criticism, passive aggression, or condescension. The instinctual human response is to react, explain, argue, or assert one's point of view. This is natural, but not always strategic. What actually unfolds when you respond with silence instead of confrontation? At first, the other party may feel confused, disoriented even. Their ego expected resistance. It was prepared for the performance of a back and forth exchange. But with no verbal response, no validation, and no emotional reward, their power begins to dissolve. The energy they cast finds no place to land. Your silence becomes a mirror, and in it they are left to confront themselves. This is not an act of cruelty. This is an act of mastery. Emotional maturity teaches us that not every action deserves a reaction. Silence is the language of those who know their energy is precious, those who understand that their presence alone has value. In this space, silence becomes a filter. It separates those who seek connection from those who seek control. In professional environments, silence is equally potent. A poised pause after a provocative statement, or a deliberate moment of stillness after a question, often elevates one's perceived authority. Those who lead with grace know that silence is not absence. It is a demonstration of self-possession. In negotiation, it pressures the other side to fill the void. In dialogue, it invites others to reflect rather than react. In conflict, it de-escalates and disarms. Many people speak from insecurity. They fill the air with over-explanations, unnecessary justifications, or verbal defenses that dilute their position. But when one learns to speak only when it adds value, not validation, their words carry more weight. Silence is not passive, it is intentional restraint, and it signals to the world that you are not driven by fear, nor a desire for approval. You are driven by clarity, confidence, and calm. There is a beauty in understanding that you do not need to win arguments to prove you are right. Sometimes walking away without a word is the loudest message you can deliver, not because you are weak, but because you refuse to be lowered into spaces that do not reflect your standards. In this context, silence becomes the protector of your peace. For those who are cultivating elegance, whether in mindset, lifestyle, or relationships, learning to use silence is essential. It aligns with grace, it reveals emotional discipline, and it creates space for thoughtful communication rather than reactive conversation. The high-value individual knows when to speak, but more importantly, when not to. Moreover, silence allows you to observe more clearly. When you're not consumed with responding, you become a better listener. You pick up on tone, posture, subtext, and intention. This awareness grants you the upper hand in both understanding and influence. People are not always transparent with their words, but their energy cannot lie. Silence gives you the room to read between the lines, and then there is another layer, inner silence, the ability to quiet the internal noise of overthinking, self-doubt, or emotional reactivity. When you cultivate internal silence, your external world begins to shift. You are no longer impulsively reacting to every disruption. You are choosing your responses from a place of stability. You are no longer enslaved by the need to be understood by everyone because you are secure in understanding yourself. This is where silence evolves into elegance, into spiritual and emotional wealth, into the kind of presence that does not demand attention, but effortlessly commands respect. The irony is that silence is often louder than noise. A composed look, a calm pause, or a gentle departure can dismantle egos far more effectively than shouting ever could. In summary, silence is not a void, it is a message, a declaration. It says, I do not need to explain myself to be valid. I do not need to raise my voice to be heard. I do not need to prove my worth through argument, because I have already proven it through my peace. It is a refined strength, a strength that separates those who react from those who lead. And once you understand its power, you will never again feel the need to respond to everything that demands your attention, because not everything deserves your voice, but everything will feel the weight of your silence. One of the most underestimated truths in social and emotional intelligence is this: ego thrives on reaction. The moment we react, especially in a heightened emotional state, we have unknowingly handed over our power. We become participants in a game we did not choose, with rules we did not set. But the individual on the other end, the one operating from ego, has been waiting for exactly this, because to them, your reaction is confirmation. It means they have impact, it means they are relevant, and for a person driven by ego rather than depth, that sense of control is intoxicating. The ego is not always loud and dramatic. Sometimes it wears the mask of sophistication, intelligence, or even charm. But at its core, it craves dominance. It measures its value through the ability to provoke, to gain attention, to influence behavior. This is why those who seek to assert superiority, whether in personal relationships, social dynamics, or professional circles, will often test your emotional equilibrium. They might make offhand comments laced with subtle disrespect, provoke with passive-aggressive remarks, or simply push boundaries to see how easily you are thrown off balance. The less grounded you are in your self-worth, the more likely you are to take the bait. And yet, the truly high-value individual understands a principle that changes everything. The refusal to engage is not weakness. It is self-command, because not every insult requires a rebuttal. Not every challenge deserves your presence. The ego expects to be met with resistance. It knows how to play with anger, jealousy, and even anxiety, but it does not know how to play with indifference. Indifference confuses it. It creates silence where the ego expected noise, detachment where it anticipated validation. In that moment, the dynamic shifts, the power returns to you, not because you fought harder, but because you chose not to fight at all. When someone's ego is fed by your reaction, your silence becomes their starvation. And this is not about manipulation, it's about sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty means you do not allow others to pull you out of alignment with yourself. You are not constantly proving, pleasing, or defending. You are simply being, you are centered. That stability, quiet and consistent, is what renders ego-driven games powerless. This principle becomes even more significant when we consider the emotional labor involved in reacting. Every time you allow yourself to become agitated by someone else's behavior, you are giving them access to your mental space, your emotional energy, and ultimately, your time. You begin to carry the weight of their intention. But that weight is not yours to carry. It belongs to them, and the moment you decide not to pick it up, not to engage, not to explain. You liberate yourself. You step out of the performance entirely. This does not mean becoming passive or avoiding confrontation when it is genuinely necessary. It means developing the discernment to recognize when your reaction serves a purpose and when it simply entertains someone else's ego. There is a subtle but powerful distinction between communication that builds connection and reaction that feeds conflict. Learning that difference is part of emotional refinement. It is what elevates your relationships, your boundaries, and your inner peace. It is also essential to understand that for many people operating from ego, your resistance, your emotional fire, is not only expected but desired. Some personalities are addicted to drama, others find validation in being able to get under someone's skin. They will say things not because they believe them, but because they want to see if you do. If they can make you second, guess your worth, your choices, or your values, they feel superior. But this superiority is fragile. It depends entirely on your participation. Without your reaction, their perception of control dissolves. This is why silence and emotional restraint are not just defensive tools. They are transformational. When you stop reacting, you stop playing the role they cast for you. You stop being a character in their internal drama and instead become an audience they cannot perform for. Eventually, without your engagement, the performance ends, the game loses meaning, and you, in your calm detachment, are free. In more intimate settings, such as romantic relationships or close friendships, the dynamic becomes even more delicate. We often feel the urge to react when we care deeply, but it is precisely in these moments that silence can be an act of self-love. It's a reminder to yourself that you do not need to exhaust your emotional reserves to be heard. That you do not need to convince someone of your value. You can walk away or remain still with dignity intact and confidence unwavering. Of course, this practice requires emotional discipline. It is not easy to remain composed when every part of you is triggered. But it is in those moments of discomfort that the most profound growth occurs. Resisting the urge to react is a form of strength that speaks louder than words. It communicates to the world, and more importantly, to yourself, that you are in control of your own narrative. Let us also acknowledge that ego is not just something we deal with in others. We all have an ego, and sometimes our own ego wants to react to defend itself. It tells us we must prove a point, get the last word, or demonstrate our superiority. But when we choose silence over ego, we choose expansion over limitation. We choose peace over pride. To live from a place of centeredness rather than reactivity is a quiet revolution. It changes how you show up in every area of life. You begin to conserve your energy for the things and people that nourish you. You stop allowing external chaos to dictate your internal world. And most importantly, you become immune to the games that once drained you. Because in the end, ego can only survive when it is seen, fed, and validated. Once you stop reacting, you stop participating in its illusion of power, and that, perhaps, is the most powerful reaction of all: no reaction. In a world that often equates emotional intensity with depth, the concept of detachment is frequently misunderstood. Some may see it as cold, indifferent, or distant, but true detachment, elegant detachment, is none of those things. It is not the absence of care, rather, it is the presence of wisdom. It is the refined art of remaining rooted in your self-worth, regardless of the emotional turbulence around you. To practice elegant detachment is to understand that your peace, your dignity, and your energy are not available for negotiation. Detachment does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop allowing your feelings to be dictated by the unpredictable behaviors, moods, or expectations of others. It is a discipline, a maturity, and a deep understanding of boundaries. When a person practices this kind of detachment, they do not chase validation. They do not argue for attention. They do not beg to be understood. They embody their truth and allow others the freedom to come, go, misunderstand, or misinterpret, without being emotionally undone. There is tremendous freedom in this approach. Imagine the mental and emotional space you regain when you no longer need to control how others see you. When their opinions no longer dictate your decisions, when their emotional outbursts no longer define your peace, this is the essence of elegant detachment. You are present, aware, and even emotionally invested, but never owned. You can care deeply without losing yourself. You can walk away from people or situations not because you feel nothing, but because you finally recognize your value. This detachment becomes especially powerful when applied to challenging relationships, whether personal or professional. Often, people become entangled in emotional dynamics that leave them drained, confused, or constantly trying to fix what is broken. They believe their effort can change another's behavior, that their love can heal someone's wounds, or that their loyalty will eventually be reciprocated. But here lies the truth that detachment teaches. No matter how much you give, if someone does not value what you offer, it will never be enough. The moment you detach, you step out of that emotional cycle. You stop offering your energy to those who only take. You stop explaining yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop internalizing the behavior of others as a reflection of your worth. Detachment is not a wall, it is a window through which you begin to see people and situations as they truly are, not as you wish them to be, and this does not make you unkind. On the contrary, detachment often allows you to be more compassionate. Because you are no longer reacting from a place of emotional depletion, but from clarity and grace. You do not need to force outcomes, manipulate dynamics, or cling to fading connections. You can love someone and still let them go. You can disagree with someone and still treat them with respect. You can observe someone's behavior and choose not to absorb it. This is the strength of a person who has mastered emotional refinement. In practicing elegant detachment, you also stop competing for attention. You no longer view silence, distance, or indifference from others as a threat, but as information. When someone withdraws, mistreats, or disrespects you, your immediate response is not to react or overcompensate. It is to step back and observe, not from pride, but from power, the power to remain loyal to your standards even when emotions are high, because what you tolerate teaches others how to treat you, and detachment ensures that your tolerance is not rooted in fear or desperation, but in discernment. Let us not confuse detachment with emotional suppression. Suppression is about denial. Detachment is about acceptance. You do not pretend to be unaffected. You simply choose not to be controlled. You allow yourself to feel, but you also allow yourself to move forward. You release the illusion that holding on harder will lead to more security. In fact, it is often the letting go, the graceful release, that brings the most clarity and empowerment. There is also a profound dignity in detachment. When someone attempts to provoke you, manipulate you, or diminish you, and you do not react, you rise, you remain poised, you communicate through your calm, your silence becomes your response, your stillness becomes your boundary. That kind of presence, silent, confident, and unmoved, is a reflection of deep internal strength. It leaves a lasting impression, far stronger than any argument or emotional display ever could. And yes, practicing detachment requires courage. It means learning to sit with discomfort. It means allowing people to leave without chasing them. It means being misunderstood without rushing to explain. It means trusting that what is meant for you will never require you to compromise your peace to keep it. This level of self-trust is rare, but once you experience it, you no longer settle for less than mutual respect, effort, and emotional maturity. Ultimately, elegant detachment is not about isolating yourself from the world. It is about aligning with your highest self in the world. It is about knowing when to engage and when to release, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to try again and when to walk away. This discernment, cultivated over time, transforms not only your relationships but your entire life experience, because when you no longer allow external forces to dictate your internal state, you become truly free. Free to love without losing yourself, free to give without being depleted, free to experience without attachment to outcome, and in that freedom you find your highest power, not in what you control, but in what you no longer need to. There is a certain quiet strength that does not demand to be seen or heard, yet it reshapes the way others respond to you. This strength is self-respect. It is not boastful, nor is it loud. It does not need to prove itself through arguments, explanations, or overcompensations. Self-respect speaks for you when you say nothing. It communicates your standards, your values, and your boundaries through your presence alone. It teaches the world how to treat you, not by force, but by example. When a person possesses self-respect, their energy shifts. They no longer chase approval. They no longer explain themselves to those who don't listen, nor remain in spaces where they are disrespected. They walk away, not because they are unaffected, but because they refuse to be devalued. This is the quiet power of someone who knows their worth. They do not allow external validation to define their internal peace. They know that walking in dignity is far more influential than speaking in desperation. Self-respect is not situational. It is not something you apply only when you feel strong or confident. It is a consistent principle that anchors you when everything around you feels uncertain. It tells you you do not need to respond to every provocation. You do not need to fix what others are unwilling to repair. You do not need to prove that you are enough. You simply are, and that certainty shapes your posture, your presence, and your decisions. People may not always understand your silence, your distance, or your refusal to engage in unnecessary drama. They may interpret it as arrogance, coldness, or pride, but that is only because they have become accustomed to those who constantly seek validation, beg for closure, or argue for clarity. When they meet someone who instead chooses self-respect, it disrupts their expectations, it creates space for reflection, and in some cases, it reveals their own lack of boundaries. The beauty of self-respect is that it is not reactive. It is proactive. It sets the tone before the situation even unfolds. It is embedded in the way you speak, the way you say no, the way you excuse yourself from conversations that do not align with your values. It is present in your decisions, the quiet ones, the difficult ones, the ones no one sees but you. These decisions, small and large, are what build your inner integrity, and integrity is the foundation of true confidence. There is a temptation, especially in emotionally charged moments, to explain yourself, to clarify your position, to seek justice in the eyes of those who wronged you, but self-respect reminds you that not every battle is worth fighting. Not every misjudgment requires correction. The need to be understood, though deeply human, is not always necessary when you are secure in your truth. Sometimes, silence is the most respectful response, not only to others, but to yourself. In this way, self-respect becomes a form of emotional elegance. It is what prevents you from oversharing. It is what stops you from participating in conversations that drain your energy or reduce your worth. It is what teaches you to say, "This does not reflect who I am, and therefore I will not invest my presence here." This type of discernment is not about ego, it is about preservation, preserving your dignity, your peace, and your emotional clarity. There are moments in life where your silence will be misunderstood, where your boundaries will be questioned, where people will attempt to guilt you into abandoning your standards. But those who truly respect you will not need constant access to your time, your explanations, or your emotional labor. They will respect the distance you create, the decisions you make, and the quiet strength behind them. We live in a world where many are taught to be agreeable at the expense of their own values, to tolerate discomfort to maintain peace, to sacrifice authenticity to preserve connection, but self-respect challenges that. It says you can be kind without being compliant, you can be graceful without being passive, you can be warm-hearted and still fiercely protective of your standards. These truths are liberating. They release you from the burden of pleasing and the trap of constant justification. One of the most profound effects of self-respect is that it makes your presence sacred. When people realize that you do not offer your time, energy, or intimacy lightly, they begin to see it as a privilege rather than a convenience. You stop being someone who is always available, always forgiving, always bending. You become someone who values their own space, time, and emotions enough to be selective. And in that selectiveness, your presence becomes meaningful. This shift does not require harshness. You do not need to become rigid or distant. On the contrary, true self-respect softens you because you are no longer at war with yourself. You are no longer proving, performing, or persuading others of your worth. You simply know it, and that inner knowing creates a life where you attract relationships, opportunities, and environments that mirror your self-worth. Self-respect also brings emotional clarity. When you are grounded in it, you stop confusing intensity for intimacy, attention for affection, or control for care. You begin to recognize what is healthy, what is reciprocal, and what is aligned with your values. You no longer settle for half love, half effort, or half honesty. And if that means standing alone at times, you are willing to do so, because you would rather be in solitude with your integrity than in company without it. In essence, self-respect is not about being better than anyone else. It is about being better to yourself. It is the decision to no longer abandon yourself in the pursuit of being chosen, accepted, or understood. It is the practice of honoring your voice, even when it shakes, of standing your ground, even when it's lonely, of staying aligned with your values, even when others don't see the worth in them. And over time, as this becomes your standard, you will notice a shift. The people around you will change. The opportunities that come to you will reflect your worth. The peace you experience will no longer be occasional. It will become your baseline. Because self-respect is not just a principle. It is a lifestyle, a way of being, and it is always louder than words. In a world that often pressures us to speak louder, react quicker, and defend ourselves constantly, there lies a quieter, deeper truth. Your silence, when rooted in self-respect, carries more power than any outburst ever could. This silence is not passive, it is intentional, it is not avoidance, it is alignment. It signals that you are no longer available for power struggles, ego games, or conversations that require you to diminish your worth in order to be seen. We've explored how ego feeds on reaction, how silence starves it, and how detachment protects your peace without hardening your heart. We've uncovered the difference between emotional absence and emotional maturity, and how choosing not to respond is not about weakness, it's about wisdom. You've learned that elegant detachment isn't about being unaffected, but about remaining intact. It is the graceful decision to preserve your energy for the things and people that reflect your values. And through it all, the foundation remains the same, self-respect. When you value yourself, you no longer place your peace in the hands of those who misuse it. You become immune to the noise around you because your inner voice becomes louder and more clear. That voice reminds you that not every battle deserves your attention, not every insult requires your defense, and not every person is qualified to access your presence. This is the quiet power of high emotional standards. This is the language of dignity. This is the energy of someone who no longer seeks control over others, but instead seeks mastery over themselves. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, to test your boundaries, or to bait you into reaction, remember, your silence is not weakness. It is strategy, it is strength, it is a boundary that needs no explanation, and in that silence, ego has nowhere left to hide, because when you refuse to perform, the game ends. Silence is your sovereignty, and only your silence will destroy their ego.